They thought he was just a tired man at the bus stop until one wrong move revealed a former Army Ranger they should have never messed with. The old wooden bus stop bench groaned softly under the weight of the man who sat there, slouched yet somehow composed. His name was Arthur Vance, a face etched with the deep lines of exhaustion, his weathered skin glistening faintly under the flicker of a faulty streetlight. It was nearing midnight, and the usually bustling streets of Phoenix, Arizona, were unusually quiet for a Friday night. Arthur's shoulders slumped under the weight of his well-worn duffel bag, filled with tools from his day job as a carpenter. Tonight he was coming from his second shift, cleaning offices downtown. He rubbed his temples, feeling the dull ache of a long, arduous week settle deep in his bones. All he wanted was to get home, sink into his ancient but beloved recliner, and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before the relentless grind started all over again. The sharp, jarring laugh of a group of young men a few feet away ripped through the quiet night, instantly catching Arthur's attention. He glanced over briefly. 4 of them, no older than their mid-20s, dressed in oversized hoodies and baggy jeans, their voices loud and sharp against the late-night air. "Yo, old man," one of them called out, his voice carrying an unmistakable sneer. Arthur ignored them, tightening his grip on his bag strap. His military training had taught him profound discipline, even in moments like these. Decades of service had instilled in him the ability to control his reactions, to assess a situation before engaging. "What's up, you deaf?" another voice chimed in, the words laced with mockery and a clear challenge. Arthur didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle. He just stared straight ahead, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of the city lights. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, the words more cutting, like small, sharp stones thrown in the dark. One of the men, a tall, lanky figure with a backward baseball cap, tossed an empty soda can. It clattered loudly, hitting the ground just inches from Arthur's scuffed work boots. For a moment, Arthur's face remained utterly calm, unreadable. But deep inside, something stirred. It's always the loud ones, he thought, the ones who never know when to quit. He knew from bitter experience that sometimes, ignoring trouble only served to make it louder, bolder. Arthur had seen this type of situation before, countless times. It wasn't the first, and he doubted it would be the last. Over the years, he'd learned that some people, when they saw a tired man in worn-out clothes, assumed weakness an easy target. They didn't see the man who had served 3 tours overseas, who had walked through fire and faced down true terror. They didn't know about the countless hours he'd spent honing his skills that had saved lives, his own and others. His life after the army had been a different kind of battlefield. Returning to civilian life was a relentless struggle. Jobs were scarce, bills piled up, and the world rarely seemed to care about the immense sacrifices made by those like him. Arthur took whatever work he could find, sometimes juggling 2 or even 3 jobs just to keep the lights on in his small apartment. Yet, no matter how hard things got, he carried himself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. Tonight was no different. He wasn't dressed to impress, just a faded olive-green work shirt, scuffed jeans and steel-toe boots. His hands, calloused and strong from years of labor, rested calmly on his knees. He looked like any other working-class man just trying to make it through another day, another week. But Arthur wasn't just any man. Underneath his calm, weary exterior was a relentless fighter. A man who had faced enemies far more dangerous than a few rowdy kids on a street corner. Still, he had no desire to fight tonight. All he wanted was peace, a rare and precious luxury these days. One of the young men, a stocky kid with a loud laugh, stepped closer, his sneakers scuffing loudly against the concrete. "What, you too good to talk to us?" he sneered, his tone dripping with false bravado. Arthur finally glanced up, his eyes meeting the young man's for the first time. They were steady, calm, and utterly unshaken. "I'm just waiting for my bus," he said simply, his voice low and even, a quiet rumble that somehow commanded attention. The young man smirked, leaning toward his friends. "Hear that? He's too busy for us. Must think he's better than us." The others laughed, emboldened by his performance, their confidence swelling in the empty street. But Arthur knew that bravado could quickly turn into something far more dangerous, something regrettable. The laughter echoed unnaturally through the empty street, bouncing off the dark, silent walls of the nearby buildings. Arthur stayed seated, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the faint headlights of a distant bus flickered like a dying ember. He took a deep, slow breath, centering himself. The leader of the group, the wiry young man with the baseball cap turned backward, took another step closer. "Man, look at you, sitting there like you own the place. Bet you don't even belong around here," he taunted, trying to get a rise out of Arthur. Arthur didn't respond. He merely adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, the only indication that he'd even heard the comment. But that silence only seemed to fuel their aggression, feeding their misguided sense of power. Another man in the group, a thin kid with a patchy beard, chimed in, tossing a crumpled fast food wrapper that landed near Arthur's boots. "Come on, old man, you scared or something?" Still nothing. Arthur's face remained utterly calm, but inside, a different story played out. His mind, honed by years of combat, was assessing the situation. His training kicked in instinctively. 4 aggressors, all within close range with one trying to dominate the interaction. Their postures and movements were all show, more bark than bite, at least that's what Arthur hoped. But then the man in the baseball cap took another step forward, crossing a line Arthur couldn't ignore. He reached out, shoving Arthur's shoulder just enough to test him, to provoke a reaction. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Weak. Yeah, that's what I thought. Weak." Arthur stood up slowly, deliberately. His movements were controlled, precise. He was taller than the young man, broader too, his frame still powerful despite the years of hard work and long nights. "You don't want to do this," Arthur said quietly, his voice steady but firm, a deep resonance that carried unexpected weight. The group erupted in laughter again, but this time, there was a subtle shift in the air. Arthur's tone wasn't angry, but it certainly wasn't weak. It carried a quiet authority they weren't expecting, a hint of something formidable lurking beneath the surface. "Man, who do you think you are? Some kind of tough guy?" Baseball Cap scoffed, stepping even closer, his friends egging him on with loud whoops and hollers. Arthur took another deep breath, the desert night air cool in his lungs. He truly didn't want this to escalate. But he also knew that avoiding it entirely might only encourage them further, making them bolder next time with someone less capable of defending themselves. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away," he said, looking Baseball Cap straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Don't waste it." But some people, Arthur knew, only understood lessons the hard way. Baseball Cap laughed, but it was forced, the kind of laugh meant to mask nerves that were beginning to fray. His friends, watching closely, started jeering louder, desperate to push him forward, to reclaim their perceived dominance. The tension thickened, palpable in the quiet street, as the young man stepped even closer to Arthur, now only a foot away. "What are you gonna do, huh?" Baseball Cap challenged, his voice laced with mocking bravado. "You think you scare me, old man?" Arthur didn't move. His eyes, calm and steady, remained locked onto the younger man's. He could feel the weight of their stares, the group testing him, waiting for a reaction, for him to break. He'd seen this dynamic 100 times before, in dusty combat zones, in rough urban neighborhoods, and now here at a quiet bus stop in Phoenix. It was always the same. Someone looking to prove something, someone too blinded by pride and ignorance to back down until it was too late. Baseball Cap lunged suddenly, pushing Arthur's chest with both hands. Arthur staggered back a single step, but he didn't retaliate, not yet. His silence, his restraint, seemed to frustrate them even more, fueling their aggression. "Oh, you're tough now, huh?" one of the others shouted, stepping forward, his fists clenched. "Let's see how tough." And just like that, the situation spiraled. Baseball Cap swung first, a wild, sloppy punch aimed directly at Arthur's face. But Arthur moved like water, sidestepping effortlessly, his movements fluid and deliberate, almost impossibly fast for a man his age. Before the punch even finished its arc, Arthur's hand shot out, gripping Baseball Cap's wrist like a vice, his fingers closing with unyielding strength. "Stop," Arthur said, his voice a low growl now, commanding and sharp, cutting through the rising chaos. But the others, caught up in the frenzy, rushed in. One grabbed at Arthur's arm while another swung a wild kick at his side. Arthur released the first man's wrist, pivoting smoothly. His free hand caught the next punch mid-air, twisting the attacker's arm just enough to send him sprawling onto the unforgiving pavement. The third man hesitated for only a second but lunged anyway foolishly. Arthur spun him around, using his own momentum to knock him off balance, sending him stumbling back into his remaining friend. The scuffle wasn't loud or dramatic. It was precise, controlled, almost surgical. Arthur wasn't trying to hurt them. He was trying to end it, swiftly and definitively, without causing lasting damage. "Enough," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the suddenly quiet night like a razor blade. His words weren't a plea, they were a direct command. The young men backed up, panting and wide-eyed, their bravado evaporating in the cool night air like morning mist. Arthur stood there, unshaken, his posture steady as if none of this had fazed him in the slightest. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos just moments before. But silence often speaks louder than words, and the lesson wasn't over yet. The weight of experience. The young men stood frozen, their arrogance and bravado completely shattered. Arthur's presence, towering and unshakable, seemed to root them in place. Baseball Cap nursed his wrist, his eyes darting frantically between his friends and Arthur. He wanted to say something, anything to salvage the scraps of his humiliated pride, but no words came. Arthur's steady gaze swept across them, calm but unyielding. "You're lucky," he said finally, his voice steady and firm, resonating with a quiet authority. "Because I've had a long day and I don't have the energy to teach you what real pain feels like." The words landed heavily not because they were loud but because they were profoundly, chillingly true. Arthur had fought in places where survival meant quick decisions and decisive action. He'd seen things that had stolen pieces of him he could never get back. These boys, in their youthful ignorance, didn't know the perilous line they'd almost crossed. Baseball Cap, desperate for one last act of defiance, spat at the ground near Arthur's boots. "Whatever, man. You ain't special." Arthur stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, measured. He stopped just inches away, leaning down slightly so that his face was level with the young man's, his gaze intense. "I'm not special," he said, his voice low and even, a mere whisper that commanded absolute attention. "But I've seen what happens to people who think they're untouchable. Trust me, son, you don't want to find out." The others shifted nervously, glancing at each other, their bravado completely crumbled. Arthur didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His calm was far more intimidating than any shout or threat could have been. "Now," Arthur continued, straightening his posture, his voice firm again, "I suggest you take this as your warning and walk away while you still can." The group hesitated, their youthful arrogance clashing violently with the undeniable reality that they were utterly outmatched. Finally, one of them, the one Arthur had tripped, muttered, "Let's go," and started backing away slowly. The others followed, dragging their feet, throwing half-hearted, weak insults over their shoulders, a desperate attempt to save face in their humiliating retreat. Arthur watched them, his expression unreadable, until they disappeared around the corner and down the block. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders to release the lingering tension. He wasn't angry, not anymore. What he felt was something deeper, more complex. A mix of pity for their ignorance and frustration at the recurring cycle of pointless aggression. He'd seen too many young men like them, blinded by their misguided need to prove something, often learning the hard way that the world didn't owe them anything. As the distant rumble of the bus approached, growing louder with each passing second, Arthur sat back down on the bench, picking up his duffel bag. The night felt a little heavier now, not because of what had happened but because of what could have. But for Arthur, the lesson wasn't just for them. It was a reminder for himself too, of the discipline and control he had fought so hard to cultivate. The bus arrived with a low hiss, its doors folding open like a reluctant sigh. Arthur climbed aboard, nodding politely to the driver, then made his way to an empty seat near the back. He dropped his bag on the floor and leaned back, staring out the window as the city lights blurred into streaking lines of yellow and white. The adrenaline had faded now, leaving only the familiar, profound weight of exhaustion. He wasn't proud of what had happened, but he wasn't ashamed either. He had given those young men every opportunity to walk away. What they'd gotten was the gentlest version of a lesson he could teach, a stark glimpse of the quiet power that lay beneath a tired man's unassuming exterior. As the bus rolled through the quiet streets, Arthur thought about the choices people make. The young men had been looking for trouble, and they'd almost found more than they could handle. He wondered where they were now, if they were laughing it off, or if any part of what had happened would stick with them, perhaps even plant a seed of doubt about their bravado. For Arthur, the moment wasn't just about them. It was a quiet reflection of his own long and arduous journey. Life had thrown its own punches at him too, testing his resolve in ways those kids couldn't possibly imagine. But through it all, he'd learned the profound value of restraint, the immense strength it took to choose peace when the world seemed determined to provoke conflict. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Long night, huh?" The bus driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror, a knowing look in his eyes. Arthur chuckled faintly, nodding. "You could say that." The driver gave a knowing smile and turned back to the road. Arthur shifted in his seat, letting the gentle hum of the engine soothe his mind. As the bus neared his stop, he stood, slinging his duffel bag over his shoulder. Stepping off into the cool night air, he walked the last block to his apartment, the small, modest space greeting him with the familiar creak of the floorboards. He set his bag down and collapsed into his worn recliner, staring at the ceiling. The events of the evening replayed in his mind, not with anger or resentment, but with quiet, detached reflection. He thought about his younger self, the lessons he'd learned the hard way, and the people who had guided him toward the man he had become. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones where you hold yourself back, where you choose not to engage. The night's events left Arthur with a simple, undeniable truth. Respect is not something you demand, it's something you earn. Those boys, like so many others he'd encountered throughout his life, were trapped in a destructive cycle of trying to prove their worth in all the wrong ways. Arthur hoped they would think back on this night and eventually realize the true strength in restraint, the dignity in walking away before it's too late. He sat in his chair, thinking not just about them, but about his own enduring journey, how life had taught him that real power comes from knowing when to act and when to stand still. It's not about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing your worth and staying true to it, no matter the circumstances. And maybe, just maybe, those young men would carry this night with them, a quiet reminder of the tired man who didn't raise his fists in anger, but still left an impact they wouldn't soon forget.